From the Ear to There Travel Studio, this is the Ear to There Disney Podcast.
The Ear to There Podcast, it's time to start the show. Be sure to hold on tight, here we go. Exploring all the different Disney destinations. Ear to There, it's time to start the fun.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ear to There Disney Podcast. I am your host, Phil Gramlich. I am also the owner and the founder of Ear to There Travel, which is a Disney specialized travel agency. It's my job to take away all that stress, all of that anxiety, and all that time that it takes to plan a Disney trip so you can focus on the really fun things like having a great time with your family and friends and enjoying the magic. Listen, booking a Disney trip, especially to Walt Disney World, takes a long time. There's a lot of research. You have to find the best dates. Then you have to find the best deal, the best hotel room. You have to decide between base tickets, Park Hopper tickets, Park Hopper Plus. There are fast passes. There are dining reservations. Oh, later you have to see if you qualify for any new discounts that come out. There's transportation, there's flights, there's special event tickets, golf, Disney Springs, you name it. There's just too much stuff for you to have to deal with. Let me deal with it. Let me take away all that time for absolutely for free. Yes, I know I sound like a TV infomercial pitchman, but I do all of that stuff at no extra cost to you. So let me be your helper. Let me be your guide. Let me be the C-3PO to your R2-D2. You'll be the cool one in the family. You'll be the one everyone likes. You get credit for when the plans work out, just like R2-D2 does. And I'll be that annoying voice in your ear, tapping you on the shoulder. I'll be saying, Master, have you done this? Have you done that? Yes, that's my C-3PO. Have you booked your fast passes? Oh my God, that's an awful C-3PO. I don't pretend that I can do many characters well. That one was off the cuff, and holy cow, was it terrible. Anyway, the point is, let me help you book your Disney trip. I cost nothing. That sounds very cheap, but I do. So come over, request your free, no obligation quote. Check out my podcast, my blog, my videos over at eartotheretravel.com. Oh, and I want to know what you think about the show. It doesn't necessarily have to be about my C-3PO imitation. Actually, don't let it be. Just let that go. Let that slide. Don't message me and talk about that. We're going to pretend that never happened. Woo, that was bad. Okay. Send me a message. Go to eartotheretravel.com/message. Let me know what you think about the podcast, about this episode, any other episode. I want to know what you think. I want to know what guests you think I need to have on. I want to know what show topic you think I need to cover. Again, eartotheretravel.com/message. And for every person that messages me in the month of October, you will be eligible to win a free candle from the Magic Candle Company. All right, here we go. This is episode number 143 for the week of October 1st. Yes, it's October 2018. Now, grab a drink, preferably a pumpkin beer. Grab a snack, preferably a ginger snap. And as a famous mouse once said, on with the show. And we're going to start off this episode like we start off every other numbered episode of the show. And that is with the What About Bob segment. This is where retired Disney Imagineer and Disney legend Bob Gurr comes on the show to talk about all kinds of stuff. He answers your questions and mine. And I've had a lot of people email me the questions in. You could also phone or call the questions in. I don't know why I said phone there, but you can call them in. The phone number to call those questions in is 267-551-1971. And if you don't know who Bob is, Bob, of course, is, again, he's a legend. He designed the monorails, the Matterhorn, the Doom buggies, the Main Street vehicles, the People Mover, the submarines. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. So please send Bob a question. He will answer on the show. Oh, just like every other week, the What About Bob segment is brought to you by the Walt Land Bus Tour. So each month, Bob takes a group of lucky guests around Southern California on a bus. You make stops in Los Angeles, in Glendale, and in Burbank. You get a box lunch and you stop at all these famous spots in the history of the Disney company, like the Griffith Park Merry-Go-Round, Imagineering, and a lot more. To get tickets to the Walt Land Bus Tour, just head on over to www.waltland.com. All right, here is a man who may or may not possess the technology to move forward and back in time, although I still don't think he's listened to my time travel episodes just yet. Here he is, Bob Gurr.
It's What About Bob? Bob Gurr, the legend, creator of the Matterhorn, the monorails and the Haunted Mansion. What about Bob, the Disney legend?
Okay, Bob, this question is from my friend Julia Moyer from North Carolina. She's a former Disney cast member. She wants to know, was there ever a time that you lost the magic and that working at Walt Disney Imagineering was just another job?
Never, never, never. It was totally exciting from the day I walked into the Disney studio in October of 1954. It was such a period of time, in fact, all the way through to the day that I was fired in 1981 from WED Enterprises. I still had that connection to Walt because, and I'll explain it this way, the people who came after Walt, some of them weren't so good, some of them were over-organized, some of them were from aerospace or there were MBAs. So I could see the separation difference between Walt, the way Walt worked, the diligence and the integrity, and the later people came along later. It was perfectly okay to be fired by later people because I wasn't fired by Walt. So that meant this spark and connection to Walt remained even at that day that I was fired, and it still continues today. And of course, as observers probably noted, we've had a lot more people come through the Walt Disney Company because it's got bigger and bigger and bigger. And of course, Imagineering has added a lot of people. And some of them aren't quite up to what would be Walt's standard of decision making. As an example, rocket rods, another example, Luigi's tires. So I still have a Walt connection, but it's not necessarily the same kind of connection to the current management.
So did you have any kind of say or any kind of input when they changed the People Mover over to rocket rods?
None, nothing.
No, okay. I figured you wouldn't have. That's not exactly your favorite.
I was aware of the job in progress. I knew the designer that did the overall styling, a very, very nice man. He had absolutely nothing to do with the engineering and totally nothing to do with the production engineering. And I also was at Disneyland and quite a few times during the era that the rocket rods were being tested. And late in the day, you'd see the software engineers coming out of the building, dragging their briefcases with the longest faces I ever saw, so that in the months before the attraction opened, I could see that it was probably not going to work, because when you have people moping along with a sad face on a Disney project, you know that they were probably assigned to a turkey, and they know it.
Was it the bank turns that they didn't have? Is that what the problem was?
No, there was a whole bunch of things. Example, compared to the guest hourly throughput of the People Mover, the idea is you always want to have an adequate hourly throughput on an attraction, even though there was a push at that time in Tomorrowland to have what they would call much more dynamic look to Tomorrowland, which means, you have things up in the air and moving around, which was like the People Mover. Then the idea was that you would have this vehicle that would accelerate and decelerate really fast. That's why it was called a rocket rod. But the reality was the turns are not banked because it was just not possible to do that. Also, there was all kinds of errors and omissions in the design of the traction system, such that the tires and the surface that they ran on were shredding the tires all the time. And I helped a guy working on a machine as an outside vendor, making a vacuum machine that would run around every day sucking up rubber dust.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so there was the whole things that weren't quite right. Also, the electronics that controlled the ride control was very touchy system in order to be quite safe, because you didn't want to run into a turn at a flat out speed without having a decel correctly. But in being very, very touchy, its number of times it would shut down per day, I think, was brand new records in Disneyland, where a good ride might stop once or twice a day, and a ride like that might stop dozens of times a day. And of course, this will slow down the hourly throughput. Another thing was, you look at the vehicle, it didn't have hardly any people in it. Another big old long vehicle with very few seats. So in other words, it didn't make any ride capacity performance that you'd really want to have in a brand new attraction. So for a great number of reasons, there was strategic decisions made early on, sort of in the blue sky period of the original concept, and somehow it got approved into production engineering and implementation before anybody asked some serious questions.
Wow. Yeah, it's one of the all-time flops, right, ever in any of the Disney parks. That's a big one.
Yeah, for example, the attraction didn't last very long, and of course the vehicles are taken out and thrown in a big pile and sort of the dump in the backyard. I got a picture of them all piled up, but I think a couple of them survived. One of them was just at the Disneyland auction at the Van Eaton Gallery out here in California, and they had a number of my vehicles plus a rocket rod vehicle all on display. And what was very interesting to people was people would look at the kind of vehicles we did back in the Walt Disney days, and then they would look at the rocket rod, and it was an extremely poorly built machine. Looked much more like the type of manufacturer that designed amusement park equipment, like carnivals and stuff like that, where it's pretty crude looking when you really look at it, and very crudely built. Sort of a night and day difference. So a lot of people observed, they said, whatever happened to Disney? Disney really had the top stuff. And then as time went on and they got more organized and got a lot bigger and had a lot of blue sky type of engineering, why did the thing come out so poorly built, in addition to being a very poorly functioning machine? People just couldn't quite understand it.
Well, yeah. I mean, I saw that. I was watching the videos from the auction, and I saw people saying that it looked like it was, even the one they saved looked like it was kind of falling apart, that vehicle, while vehicles that you guys designed, 30 years before were in mint condition sitting there. So I think that goes to say something about the design of the vehicle itself.
Well, example of some of the differences. It had a lot of styling lines, which I think in a design rendering, it probably looked pretty neat. But when it got down to the actual manufacturer trying to cut the cost of manufacture, the compound body shapes all along the sides, rather than making full molds for that with a substantial material, like fiberglass, they molded it out of foam, a very lightweight foam, and then they put kind of like a vinyl skin over that. So it was quite fragile. Any bumping and banging would crack it and it would start to fall apart. They also used some elastomeric materials for the seating area, which did not have long life in ultraviolet, out in the sun. And so those materials degraded very, very rapidly. Then if you look down in the floor area, there was a lot of flat sheet metal parts that were just blatantly popped together with just a bunch of screws and rivets. Not the sort of thing that I would ever do, where you have visible fasteners right and left all over the place. You try to design it so that it looks really super professional compared to most amusement park apparatus. And that was why Walt really wanted stuff that he wanted to stuff his way and really do it the best we could do it. And of course, after he passed away, we just kept on designing it the same way.
Thank you again so much to Bob for answering yet another question on the show. And to be honest with you, the rocket rods part of the conversation wasn't really planned. I just had a follow-up question about that attraction. I know that it's universally disliked by not only Disney fans, but Imagineers as well. And today we found out why. So thank you again to Bob for answering another question on the show. And again, to get a question in to Bob, you can call the voice line 267-551-1971. Or you could always email me at phil@eartotheretravel.com. All right, moving on. And if you're a Bob Gurr fan, then you are in luck, because this episode has a lot more Bob. And it's all about the history of flight in the Disney company. Enjoy. I'm sure you've heard the stories of Walt Disney flying over Central Florida, scouting out the exact location for his Florida project. Or maybe you've heard about him taking flights down to his Smoke Tree Ranch to spend weekends away from the hustle and bustle of Los Angeles. Or you might have even heard this week's guest's total fascination with airplanes and flight. This week, I wanted to talk all about the history of flight within the Disney company, and I believe I have the perfect guest to talk about just that. Here to talk with me all about the history of airplanes and aviation in the Disney company is the one man who knows it all, retired Disney Imagineer, Disney legend, Mr. Bob Gurr. Bob, thanks again for coming on.
Hey, here we go. Let's put the throttle on and get up in the sky.
All right. So there's so much that I want to ask you about, but I've heard a little bit of your story about your personal history and love for flying for planes. Can you tell me a little bit about how that started before we get into the history of flight with the Disney company?
Sure. I think when I was somewhere around 18 months old, or just a little bit later than that, according to what my mother said, as you know, parents lay in wait for the child's first words, which is hopefully dada or mama. It was airplane, to their great disappointment. So somehow looking up and seeing airplanes, because we weren't too far from a small airport, that's my first super exciting visions. And it continues to this day. I don't know why that is, but that is the way it is. And that led to lifetime continuous interest in aviation. I did everything to be around airplanes, learn everything. Always wanted to fly, never could. I got all the way to my late 20s and joined a glider club where finally I could go flying. And did that for 50 years.
And now glider, for me, who doesn't know a ton about airplanes, that's a motorless plane, right? Am I wrong about that?
A glider is nothing more than an airplane that does not have a motor. A glider typically is towed by an airplane with a rope up to, say, 2,000 feet, and then the glider releases the end of the rope and is hopefully finds and utilizes updrafts. Many kinds of updrafts exist. Most people think, well, airplanes fall down when there's no motor. No, that's not true at all. You take a Boeing 747. If you retard the power, say at 30,000 feet, do you know how many miles that airplane is going to glide with the motors off? I mean, it goes an incredible distance because the any big, good modern airplane is a very, very good glider. They don't just fall out of the sky; they just slowly glide down. At some kind of a glide ratio. Let's say a glide ratio of 18 to 1, something like that. If you're up a mile, you'll go 18 forward miles. A glider, typically, if you're up, you can go a mile up, you can go 35 miles.
Wow.
A top competitive racing glider, if you're up 1 mile, you can glide 50 miles before it comes down. The efficiency is unbelievable. The power of the atmosphere is so intense that even when I had a motor glider for 25 years, I could climb faster with the motor off and a good thermal than I could with the motor on.
Wow. I had no idea that it worked like that. What's your longest flight on a glider? Do you remember?
Oh, it's a little over 5 hours. I did
Wow.
a number of 5 hour flights. You're not limited so much by having a lift that will last all day. It's that at some point in time, I get hungry. I got to come down. You have to do certain things for the physical stuff you got to do in a glider. But that's kind of a long day. I did one. It was 8 hours one time in the Sierra Mountains over Mount Whitney. Spent most of the day at 15 to 17,000 feet on a gloriously beautiful day up under a bunch of cumulus clouds. It was so pretty, and I was flying it from up north of Reno down to Burbank, and about 2/3 of the distance was all done without a motor.
Wow, that's insane. Yeah, I had no idea that you could do that. That's unbelievable. All right, so let's talk about how now you came on with the Disney company in 1954, right? When did Walt start to first think about, getting a plane for the company for himself?
That was 1963. The initial story sort of was like Walt and Lily drove down a couple times a month to Palm Springs from their home out in Holmby Hills, so that's like a 2 hour plus drive down and drive back. And he did that for years. And then there was one of his animators, a guy by the name of Wooly Reitherman, formed a flying club called Sky Roamers, and would tease Walt about why in the world do you drive down there when you can fly down there. And so eventually one of the pilots said, well, we'll rent an airplane and I'll show you how nice it is to just go down there by an airplane. It only take you about 45 minutes at the most. And so Walt did that a couple of times, and then apparently he was down there with the grandchildren at the airport, and then one of the grandkids, I think it was Chris, saw that Frank Sinatra had an airplane there that he was using. He had a big window in it, and the thing looked like a piano. And I guess he kidded Grandpa and said something like, well, Gramps, he's got an airplane. Why don't you? Well, the gauntlet apparently got dropped. So he continued to talk with Chuck Malone, the pilot, had been flying down there a couple of times, and said, okay, Chuck, let's get an airplane. And so Chuck was highly knowledgeable, and so he immediately figured out what airplane to buy, and immediately figured out you have to develop a flight operations department. It has to have, rigid, safe rules and all that sort of stuff. So he had a friend with American Airlines, and so he picked up the American Airlines charter operation rules and regulations. And they bought a Beechcraft Model 80 Queen Air, which was a twin-engine airplane. Had two 550 cubic inch engines in it, and it would carry, I think, about 8 people, I think. And the first thing Walt did was he arranged to have some of the key executives. Every couple of days, Chuck would take them up for an airplane ride for 2 hours with box lunches. and Walt wanted everybody to see how useful an airplane would be in the company. So that was how we introduced airline flying, corporate airline flying, to many of the executives. And this became really successful. And the next thing they said, well, we're going to get into a lot of work eventually in New York World's Fair. And then, of course, in the back of his mind, he knew he was going to build something somewhere in the East. We got to have a bigger, faster airplane. So they bought an early model Gulfstream G1, which is a turboprop. They could put about 14 people in that airplane. And then for an interim while, they bought a Beechcraft King Air 90, which is a really pretty turboprop airplane. But we didn't use that as much because the Gulfstream now turned out to be a super airplane. It could go anywhere anybody wanted to go, but it's still slow. It's got propellers. So that went on till I guess the early 1970s when we had a fuel crisis come along. Disney had ordered a Gulfstream 2, which was a jet, twin-engine jet, but due to the prices and the fuel thing, the company backed off and canceled their order. And then, of course, the fuel situation went away. So then Disney was in a spot that, when you buy an airplane, you buy a position on an assembly line. So now Disney had to get back in line with Gulfstream. Now that the Gulfstream's really popular. So I think by 76, they got their first one. And then over the years, they would keep moving up. So today, Disney has 3 big Gulfstreams and a slightly smaller Challenger 600 aircraft for shorter work. The one that they started to kid everybody that as Bob Iger's airplane is a brand new, spanking new Gulfstream 650 ER. ER means extended range. And this airplane it's about a $62 million airplane. It's a terrific tool that has to go from Burbank to Shanghai, 12,000 miles nonstop with a cruising altitude of 41,000 feet with a cabin altitude of 12,000 feet instead of commercial like 8,000 feet. It's got the latest safety everything. Absolutely gorgeous airplane. They have another one that's about a year earlier. So those are the 2 prime airplanes that handle all of the Disney transportation, both with the movie stars, TV executives. You have to be able to go anywhere in the world at any minute. That's why corporate airplanes are so valuable. But that's essentially the history of the company.
So going back to when the World's Fair was was going on, how many flights do you think you took back and forth between California and New York in those days?
Oh boy, that poor little airplane, that original Gulfstream G1. Most corporate airplanes don't get that much use a week, but in the first year of Disney using the Gulfstream G1, we were the highest utilization rate of any Gulfstream airplane, and we had that record for years because we had I think at one time we had 4 or 5 pilots and a couple of flight attendants because that airplane we just ran the wings off that thing. Burbank to New York, just back and forth several times a week. And then of course we got it into Florida. We had so many people traveling. We used airlines a lot. In addition to having the Gulfstream, airplanes have what's called a tail number, and we bought that airplane as 532 George, and then we changed the name to 234MM, which is 234 Mickey Mouse. So that name Mickey Mouse got put on the Gulfstream, then it got moved over to the Gulfstream, and it stayed on that for a long time. Of course, we got different license numbers now because we have a kind of a secret name company for the Disney airline. You won't see Disney about it. It's got an operation that has a little tiny name on a door hidden behind a bush, and nobody knows what's in there, except it's a giant hangar full of these gorgeous airplanes. But it just was used all the time. The flight planning used up all the time. Of course, airplanes need maintenance; they need inspections periodically. So the airplane literally never stood still for years. One time when it was available for a few days, I jokingly told our guys that when we were researching advanced transportation for Epcot, there was a railroad and advanced transportation test facility in Pueblo, Colorado, way out in the desert. And I thought it would be very valuable if we could go look at that. And they invited us to go, sure, come spend the day. We'll show you everything we got. So I jokingly sent a requisition to the flight department requisitioning the airplane for a day for 12 people with boxed lunches. And they approved it. And I said, oh, my God, we got to go tomorrow. I just rented an airplane. So the pilots flew us over there with the boxed lunches, and they sent a note to us. They say, wear big boots. The place has rattlesnakes.
Oh,
and a guy met us in a big old van down this bumpy road for like a half hour to get to the secret test place. So, yes, the airplane was available if you needed it. Just send a requisition, and it's yours.
Wow. So were you the Mickey Mouse plane? That was the Gulfstream. That was the one that was on display at Hollywood Studios for a number of years, or am I wrong about that?
No, that's correct. The airplane originally was a very kind of a soft off-white with a sort of a light tan looking underbody with a nice orange stripe on it. That was his official original colors. And then when they took it out of service, they flew it locally from Herndon Airport in Orlando, and they flew it to Disney's. Disney had a private airstrip for short takeoff and land ideas. They were going to have over by the Wilderness Lodge, which you can still see where that airport was. We were going to have commuter traffic be able to serve Walt Disney World, which never worked out. But anyway, they flew the Gulfstream over there, which was a little bit too big for that little strip. But they flew it with only a small amount of fuel, and then they towed it over to over by World Showcase and repainted it, to a nice blue color. And I think they just recently moved it to some other place. They needed that space for something. But every once in a while, I'm in Walt Disney World, I would get a ride over, and I would get out, and I would go up and sort of pet the propeller and say, boy, the mouse, we had a lot of rides.
Yeah.
Oh, it's kind of it's like an old horse. I go up and pet the horse.
I've read that, was it Walt's wife, Lillian, that designed the interior of that? Or is that a different plane?
Oh, no. When you buy a corporate airplane, it's called a green airplane. In other words, they're painted in kind of a green colored zinc chromate. Okay. And the airplane will be delivered with a complete cockpit, but no interior, whatever. And you'll have it flown to a company that builds interiors. See, airplanes are not built like cars. You buy the airplane, and then you buy the interior, and you get to pick out which manufacturer you like to put your interior. And of course, that means you can pick out any color, any kind of carpet, color, seats, anything to your heart's content. And you can configure it any way you want if you got a lot of money. And of course, Walt gave Lily the choice of colors, so she picked out some very nice, warm and kind of orangish looking colors. Really nice fabrics inside. It was a really, really pleasant airplane inside.
Was this the plane that Walt also had the jump seat built so we could sit by the cockpit? Oh, yes. Well, in fact, going back to the little Gulfstream, no, not the Gulfstream, the Beechcraft Model 80, Chuck Malone was the pilot, and I shared an office with him. Well, in fact, he shared my office because we hadn't set up a flight department yet. And first thing he wanted was a jump seat, so I engineered the jump seat, and then the Disney Studio machine shop built it, and we installed it in the airplane.
I also designed several other parts that would, extra storage that goes under the seats, things like that. So I was thrilled to death to design airplane accessories for that one. But of course, a plane like the Gulfstream, they come with a jump seat right behind the cockpit. And Walt always spent so much time up there. I think they say Lily got a little upset with him because Walt was so interested in how the airplane flew. And of course, they let him fly at one time for a bit of a while, and she did not like that one bit. But again, it goes back to his curiosity. He wanted to know everything about everything and how everything works.
Sure. Did you ever get to fly it?
No, not the Gulfstream, but when we had the Beech 80, that was certified for single pilot, where everything else is a twin pilot. Single pilot, whenever we had Roger Brogy, my boss, and I had to go up to Aero Development or someplace, Chuck always said, Bob, you sit up on the front. I want you in the right seat. You're a glider pilot. You'll see other airplanes before I'll ever see them. Because, glider pilots are always looking at everything. So Chuck and I had a really, really good time. He flew the plane, and he asked me to do certain things as co-pilot.
Did you ever have a particularly bad flight on one of those flights? Maybe a scary experience on one of the flights with Walt or without?
No, it was not scary. We had Joe Fowler, the Admiral, who likes coffee that is Navy grog. And Chuck had made his own homemade cup holders that sticking on the instrument panel, and they were just bent out of like heavy wire. And the first flight, they were kind of getting tested, so we didn't give it a thought. And I'm sitting there in the jump seat watching all this, and we landed up at San Jose, California, and the airplane kind of bumped a bit with a nose gear, and the cups jiggled, and all the Navy grog was going all down the electronic instruments and getting into switches, and Chuck was just furious. And they had a dickens of a time the rest of the day getting the coffee out of the electronics so it'd be safe to fly home at the end of the business day. That's the only close thing I ever saw. We got the cup holder dumped the coffee in the electronics.
So no blowing out the what do you call it? The landing gear? No white knuckle flights like that with Walt?
Well, no, like that. We did have a flight from Troy, Michigan to, we had to go down to John Wayne Airport in Orange County to let Dick Nunes off. So we only had maybe 5 people aboard. And so it's a long, long flight, but for takeoff, I always go up and sit in the jump seat, and I watch what the 2 pilots are doing. And I noticed they were in a bit of a rush taxiing onto the runway. Normally, you make a kind of a slow turn into the runway, and then you apply the power. But on this day, the guys kind of gave it a little bit too much power. And the nature of twin-engine turboprop engines, and that as you first start to advance the throttle, sometimes the engines don't come up at the same speed exactly, and that's why you kind of use a little bit of caution. And as the guys turned left onto the runway, the left engine surged a little bit more than the right engine, which made it kind of, it was forcing the airplane to the right when the nose gear was forcing it to the left. And then there was a strange sound, and then as we were rolling down the runway, accelerating for takeoff, there was a weird vibration. And then as soon as we lifted off, the vibration stopped. And the guys looked at each other and didn't say anything, but I thought, well, that didn't sound right. So as we approached Orange County, late, it was dark by that time, pilot called me up to the cockpit. And of course, the other guys are drunk by this time because I think we drank the bar dry, I think. He said, Bob, would you please explain to everybody to go in the back, the last seats, get the pillows out and put the pillows on your lap and put your face in the pillow and strap yourself in really, really, really good. Well, trying to get 4 drunks to do that and and not scare them.
Yeah, right.
So I went in the back with everybody else, but of course I sat up. I wanted to see what's going on. Of course, we make a standard approach to Orange County, and I noticed there's fire engines on each side of the runway, and as we're slowing down, they're speeding up to catch up with us. It turned out a tire had the bead had come off the rim, but it popped back on but the air came out, which meant we landed with a single tire heavily loaded, and the other tire was flopping and banging around, but it didn't hurt it. So we stopped. The fire department went away, and everybody, Dick got out, and the rest of the guys stayed inside. So I climbed down and I watched the mechanics come out with nitrogen, and we pumped the tire up, and it held. And I said, "Oh, no damage. Okay. The rest of you guys get back in. We'll go to Burbank, and then you can go home."
Wow.
So that was the only excitement, just having fire engines chase you down the runway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, nothing to it. So real quick, I wanted to ask you another one. Were you involved in any of the flights when Walt was flying over Florida or looking for different places to open his next theme park? Were you a part of those flights as well?
No, none of the flights that were exploratory, because you got to remember, in the days before Walt bought the Florida property, the Disney plane was never seen in Florida. You have to remember, everybody pays attention to what everybody's doing. And there was some inkling for years that Walt Disney's going to do another park someplace. So what they would do is very surreptitious. They'd schedule a flight with the mouse to land in another state, and they'd go get a couple of cars and drive down to Florida. Now, the reason for that is all aircraft have a tail number. It's a Federal Aviation Agency registration, and that is public information. There are companies who are in the espionage business of tracking what airplanes owned by whom are going where. It's always been that way. It's you can go today on the internet to FlightAware site, and you can track everybody and do your own espionage. But this way, Walt knew that the Mickey Mouse is such a visible airplane because it's got that name, Mickey Mouse, that everybody's tracking where is Walt. So Walt had to go to a fake place and get a ground transport and do it all that way. So once the property was purchased, why, yes, now the airplane's down there. And I was on one of the first flights where we were looking at the property, and the idea was we'll slow down and put the flaps out, be down 1,000 feet, get approval to do that, and we'll drive around the property line. And I remember being so impressed. The airplane took almost 20 minutes to fly around the Disney property.
Wow.
And I was taking pictures out the window, and I remember seeing like one little building and a whole bunch of water ponds, and saying to myself, I says, "Oh boy, those people down in Orlando, they have no idea what we're going to do to them." And that was a flight in, I believe, it was really early, late '65 or very early '66.
And now look, 47 years later, yesterday was the anniversary of the opening of Walt Disney World.
That's exactly right. Look what we did to them.
All right, Bob. Well, thank you so much, as always, for spending the time to talk to me. And I know everybody would be excited to hear this episode. I'm excited to let to let them hear it. So thank you again for being on, and thank you for coming on. You're like the mainstay of the show. You're on every single episode that I put out there. So thank you so much for all of that.
Well, do me a favor with your fans. I remind you every time, I would love to have a program full of non-Disney questions, even though if they're from Disney fans, because some people know the other stuff I did as Gurr Design, and I would love to answer some of the questions on some really outrageous, crazy projects that I got into after I got fired from Disney.
All right, so they're hearing, I'm going to leave this in the episode. So they're hearing you yourself. They're not just hearing me this time. They're hearing you ask. So hopefully this month we'll get a whole bunch of questions. So next month I can ask a whole lot of non-Disney questions.
Correct.
Awesome. All right. Well, Bob, thank you so much again. and I'll talk to you next month.
Okie dokie. See y'all.
And that is going to do it for this week's episode of the Ear to There Disney podcast. Thank you once again to the What About Bob segment star and to this week's guest, the one, the only, Mr. Bob Gurr. Bob is the best. And thank you so much for listening to yet another episode of the show. Remember, I want to hear from you. Send me a message. Head over to eartotheretravel.com/message. Let me know what you thought about this week's show. And for every person that answers or sends me a message in October, you will be eligible for that free candle from the Magic Candle Company. All right, so keep an eye out for the next Ear to There podcast each and every Monday, as well as an episode of It's a Food World or the Walt Disney World Word of the Week on Thursday. So until next time, thank you again so much once again, as always, for listening. You are awesome, and I really appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time each and every week. Have yourself a fantastic week. Happy October. Happy fall. Bye-bye.
Ear to there.